Let's bring in Sabrina Siddiqui and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Sabrina is in Washington. She's a political reporter with The Guardian. And Caitlin is here in New York. She's a CBSN political contributor and national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Welcome to you both. Let's start with this. Senators Burr and Warner were clear that they are on the same page, in contrast to Congressman Schiff and Nunes, who seem to be more at odds really every day. How deliberate do you think this senator's show of bipartisan unity was today, Sabrina?
Well, I think that they definitely wanted to offer a stark contrast to the House, because the fact of the matter is that when it comes to the House Intelligence Committee, a bipartisan investigation is simply dead. And that happened when, of course, Adam Schiff publicly called for Devin Nunes to recuse himself from the investigation. And because of that perception of impropriety that stemmed from Devin Nunes going to the White House to discuss the investigation and keeping his own committee in the dark, I think the onus will really be on the Senate in order for the public to have confidence that there has been an independent probe into Russia's efforts to meddle into election, as well as, in particular, Donald Trump's own ties to Russia, because this only gives more ammunition otherwise to those who are calling for a special prosecutor, saying that Republicans cannot oversee an independent investigation on their own president, which is why I think you see a very different tone and posture on the part of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Caitlin? Because it was interesting. They didn't comment on the House Intel probe. The senators didn't. But it was impossible not to see the contrast between how these senators were operating and what we've been seeing on the House side.
Exactly. And that was exactly the point. Sabrina's right. This was a very intentional press conference for them to appear together side by side. You saw Mark Warner pat Senator Burr on the shoulder at one point. They expressed how confident they were in each other and in their committee. This was very much a way to show that they are capable of this investigation, and also to kind of restore the faith and integrity of panels in Congress. The Intelligence Committee has, on both sides, has traditionally been a really bipartisan, nonpartisan committee. Of course, the House investigation now has been, there's a cloud over that given Nunes's actions, and as Sabrina mentioned, Adam Schiff calling for his recusal. The Senate very much wants to keep that bipartisanship intact on an issue this big. And so we'll see. I'm really interested to see who they bring forward in their public hearings. They're going to have one tomorrow with some experts on Russian meddling. But remember, the House canceled a couple of hearings that they intended to have. Mark Warner has said he wants to bring Sally Yates in, and others potentially. They said they're also talking to Michael Flynn.
So, Sabrina, it's interesting. We heard Congressman Charlie Dent say that he wants the Senate panel to take the lead in the Russia investigations. This notion of the Senate leading Congress's investigation, what does that actually look like, you think?
Well, I think it underscores that although Republicans are not joining calls for Devin Nunes to recuse himself, they acknowledge that the House is not in a position to deliver a credible conclusion with respect to this particular investigation. And I think that one of the things that we've heard, certainly from members in both parties, is surprised that the White House is also unable to provide any information on the meeting and the encounter with Devin Nunes. Sean Spicer just today, when he was addressing reporters, couldn't say even now who cleared Devin Nunes when it came to his meeting, as well as who he met with while he was there. And so I think when you hear people like Charlie Dent, who's a more moderate Republican, you've also heard of Walter Jones, another moderate Republican from North Carolina, who actually did say that Devin Nunes should recuse himself, kind of put their emphasis on the Senate investigation. That really just underscores again how communication has broken down on the part of the House, and that if there is going to be any faith in Congress, it will come from the Senate.
But what happens on the House side now, Caitlin? I mean, like, they just give up? I mean, how does that work? What does that look like?
And I was talking to a committee staffer who said that they are trying to get Comey to come back and testify. Remember, that, again, was postponed again. The committee also does a lot of other work, and so there is a big question about whether they can kind of continue the other things they are working on. But it is very difficult to see how they continue at the pace at which they they were operating with these public hearings, calling in, the big shots in the Intelligence, National Security Committees. It's really difficult to see how they do that. And you saw in the hearing last week, which seems like eons ago.
It does, it really does, yeah.
But with Comey, that it was, you could already see the kind of partisan divides there, with Democrats really focused on the Russian meddling and possible collusion, and Republicans focusing on the leaking of names. And so that's very difficult to see how they proceed in a bipartisan fashion.
Right, we'll continue to watch that. Let's turn now to health care. I want to play another clip from Norah O'Donnell's interview with House Speaker Paul Ryan. It's his first TV interview since pulling the American Health Care Act. Take a listen.
Do you think it would have helped if the president were more involved in the policy itself?
Oh, he was deeply involved. That's the thing that I was so pleased and impressed with. He really rolled up his sleeves. So actually, he's up to speed on the issue. He knows the circumstances. What I worry about, Norah, is that if we don't do this, then he'll just go work with Democrats to try and change Obamacare. And that's hardly a conservative thing. This is a can-do president who's a business guy who wants to get things done. And I know that he wants to get things done with the Republican Congress. But if this Republican Congress allows the perfect to be the enemy of the good, I worry we'll push the president into working with Democrats. He's been suggesting that as much.
I mean, have you reached out to the Democrats yet to work on this bill, Pelosi?
No, I'm trying to get this bill passed. Nancy and I see things very, very differently. I don't want government running healthcare.
Then you guys are not on the same page. The President of the United States saying he's going to work with Democrats on this.
Yeah, I know he's been saying that, and I don't want that to happen. You know why? Because I want a patient-centered system. I don't want government running healthcare. The government shouldn't tell you what you must do with your life, with your healthcare. We should give people choices.
All right, so Speaker Ryan says he worries that the president will try to cut a deal with Democrats on health care. I like the speaker there saying Nancy and I see things very, very differently. So, Caitlin, what kind of position would it put Speaker Ryan in if the president decided he wanted to go ahead and proceed and work with Democrats?
Well, I thought it was very interesting in that interview. He made it very clear that he wants the president to shoulder some of the blame for this, right? Saying he was very involved, rolled up his sleeves, and that sort of thing. I'm really skeptical of whether the president can actually work with Democrats, because Democrats I've been talking to see little political incentive to work with this president, particularly since his numbers have dropped even lower after this bill. And it's really interesting to watch them holding the hard line on things like the nomination for the Supreme Court, for example, which is traditionally more of a bipartisan movement action. And so Democrats that I've talked to, even from states like Ohio, that where Trump won, don't really see a political incentive to work with this president. So even if he picks off, there are 10 senators up for re-election in Trump states on the Senate side, and there are about a dozen or so Democrats from Trump districts on the House side. Still, you add up that math, it doesn't quite get you there.
I mean, Sabrina, what do you think? I mean, the president has been making these overtures, right? And making very clear, look, hey, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and reach out. And it's interesting to hear, again, Speaker Ryan express his absolute discomfort with that idea.
I think that Speaker Ryan's comments were interesting because they sort of served as a reminder to members of his own party who did not ultimately coalesce around the Republican leadership's plan on health care last week, that this president is not necessarily an ideologue, especially when it comes to health care. He has held multiple positions in the past. And so that's kind of Paul Ryan's way of warning them that it's not beyond Donald Trump to just accept Obamacare as the law of the land and potentially signal that he's open to changes that are geared toward fixing the existing health care law. Now, as Caitlin said, I think she's absolutely right. I don't think Democrats would necessarily come to the table because they're under a lot of pressure from their base not to work with this particular administration and not to, as they say, normalize Donald Trump. They certainly have made the case that his own presidency is unprecedented. But that's kind of Paul Ryan. You heard him say that there's only one shot to repeal and replace Obamacare, and it's now. There have been reports that House Republican leaderships are looking at having another go at health care reform and at advancing the proposal that they were unable to hold a vote on last week. So this could be kind of an early message that if we don't act now, then the president will go ahead and actually just improve upon Obamacare by working with Democrats.
But realistically, Sabrina, what are the chances that they can get past the very same differences that people still seem to have on this issue?
Right. There's actually some reporting today in Bloomberg News that they might even look at holding a vote as early as next week, but they weren't willing to get into timing. And it's hard to imagine that they could really just bridge the divide that we saw between the Freedom Caucus, which wanted dramatic changes, but then if you made those changes, such as dropping the essential health benefits under Obamacare, that was what was the deal breaker for moderates, who then said that it was going too far, and then you lose their support. But there has been indication that the Freedom Caucus is now actually talking with moderates within the Republican Party in the House to see if there's somewhere where they can come to some kind of agreement on changes to the Republican healthcare plan that they could both be on board with. But again, you know, as you mentioned, especially with Donald Trump not being particularly engaged on this issue, certainly not on the policy details, it's hard to see how they get to the 218 votes they would need and don't just end up with repeating the same issue that we saw last week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Meantime, the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, will become an unpaid advisor to her father in the White House. Her title is assistant to the president. But what should we expect her role to look like in this administration moving forward? Caitlin, this has been a point of much speculation, and now it appears it's actually happening.
Right, it's actually official. She's been playing a very public role. She's been in some of these meetings. She's met with women business leaders, for example, and other sorts of things. And so she says that she is not taking a public salary, and there are questions about whether doing so would allow her to skirt some of the ethics laws. You have Democratic senators asking the ethics officers to look into this and see whether she is violating any kind of principles. Remember, Republicans would have been very up in arms if the daughter of Hillary Clinton were to play this kind of role. The children have Ivanka and her husband, of course, Jared Kushner, is an advisor, key advisor in the White House. It just brings up a lot of questions about what this kind of role is, but she has been playing this role rather publicly. This just makes it official.
Yeah, Sabrina, what do you think about that? Because, I mean, Caitlin brings up a good point. This is something that has already essentially been happening. It's just now gotten official with the title.
Right. I think the fact that Ivanka had clearly been informally advising the administration raised a lot of ethics questions. Certainly she wasn't subject to the same financial disclosures that employees are typically subject to. So this now forces her to comply with all of the various ethics rules. But I also think that it's still not clear what exactly her influence, as well as that of Jared Kushner, is when it comes to policy, because you know that Jared Kushner was given, for example, this new role this week to kind of oversee this task force that's going to overhaul the federal government. Up until now, he was supposed to be resolving peace in the Middle East, the Israel-Palestine conflict. Right. He's been given a very wide range of responsibilities. Ivanka says she's focused on women's issues, but we haven't actually seen any policy proposals from the administration on maternity leave or paid family leave and the issues that Democrats say they would want to work with Ivanka on. So it's for now, it seems to be more of a way to kind of quell the concerns over ethics by making everything official rather than give any clear indication, as Caitlin says, as to what their actual roles are.
All right, yet another thing on the list to keep an eye on. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Sabrina Siddiqui, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can see more of Norah O'Donnell's interview with House Speaker Ryan Thursday on CBS This Morning. Also, we'll have extended clips throughout the day right here on CBSN.